As government places civil society organizations into a chokehold, the fate of the Democratic Governance Facility DGF, a multi-donor vote established by 8 EU countries, remains unknown. Highly placed sources revealed that some EU envoys were growing frustrated with government's delay to lift the suspension after the parties hammered out new rules of engagement. But even if DGF was given a new lease of life, the facility will operate under stringent conditions. According to the addendum to the Memorandum of Understanding, it gives government the latitude to place many of DGF's activities under the microscope.
DGF was halted, and anybody who did not read Museveni's letter will also be under the illusion that reopening it is something simple. Because there was a lot that is written in that letter. Yeah? And I think for me, I believe that DGF, the regime would want to push DGF, keep it closed as long as it is politically tenable. So if you have the contributors of DGF, these donors, and if they are thinking that DGF will be resumed because of diplomatic niceties, I think that's really, for me, that would be a big joke.
Finance surrendering the sovereignty is tantamount to the Minister of Finance officials surrendering the sovereignty of Uganda to foreigners. We have had previous similar funding, but with the consent of cabinet, sometimes consent of parliament. Because then if you involve cabinet and parliament, there are safeguards. First of all, you know how much money, you know where it is coming from, you know what is going to be. You agree with these groups what is going to be handled with this money. You may perhaps not even buy the match on who is going to receive the money. But even that one is equally important. Who is going to receive the money, who's going to carry out these activities? Are they hostile activities? Are they subversive activities? What are they?
The addendum, authored on June 2nd, 2021, a copy seen by NTV, was authored by the outgoing Foreign Affairs Permanent Secretary, Ambassador Patrick Mogoya, and copied to the Danish envoy, Nicolaj Abraham H. Petersen. In February, the President ordered the Finance Minister, Mattia Kasaija, to immediately suspend the facility, which he accused of bankrolling NGO activities to undermine his government.
But there are organizations that are affected directly. There are individuals who have been employed in organizations funded by DGF. They lose their salaries. They lose their livelihoods.
At the time of the pandemic.
At the time of the pandemic. They can't look after their children. And then what you have, instead of dealing with those issues, you have these NGO bureau people writing, making these funny statements. We must be, I think as a country, as a people, there must be something fundamentally wrong with us. We need to really put a camera on ourselves. We look at ourselves in a mirror and say there must be something fundamentally wrong with us.
The investigation will tell us who, from intelligence point of view, we know the local people, the local groups that have received the money. We even have information of how much and at what interval, but we now form official investigation to tell us the money trail, what it has done.
But DGF lists equitable growth, poverty eradication, rule of law, and long-term stability as the plank of its work in the country. With a financial war chest worth 500 billion shillings, DGF provided funds to government ministries and departments. It was also the largest financier of local NGOs, which employed hundreds of Ugandans. Part of the letter authored by Mogoya reads, and I quote, "The parties have agreed to amend the Memorandum of Understanding MOU and any other agreements that might concern the Democratic Governance Facility DGF with a view to streamlining its funding modalities and rationalizing the grants governance structure to provide for the appropriate participation of the government of Uganda." According to the document, the deal was struck through mutual understanding and gives government a role on the steering committee by 3 members. The addendum recommends that each country represented on the board or the steering committee shall have one vote. In case of a contentious matter by one or more board members and provided the issue has remained unresolved through the normal decision-making mechanism established by the DGF board for more than one calendar month, any board member may request that such an issue be elevated to the ministerial level with a view to having it resolved amicably. The document also specifies that, in case the facility receives funding from any third-party donor or partner towards any of the programs covered by the MOU, government will have to be notified of the contribution including the amount donated. Whereas this deal was supposedly struck through mutual understanding, civil society actors warned that it's part of the gradual plan to torpedo civic space in the country. In December 2020, government commenced a purge against NGOs. Amongst those targeted were senior officials who represented Western capitals. They were accused of pursuing a neo-colonial agenda by sponsoring regime opponents.
The government, and none other than the president, has complained publicly that there were foreign elements, especially from Europe and America, that were meddling in an attempt to subvert the political direction, the election, and stability of Uganda through various activities, including underhand funding, support, training both locally and outside, designing a media strategy, locally and foreign, to harass the government of Uganda. And we have seen throughout this election the posture of the media, local and foreign, the posture of civil society organizations in Uganda, international NGOs, and some even diplomatic missions.
In December 2020, Simon Osborn was carted off to the airport and deported. An influential figure in the diplomatic community, Osborn was the European Union advisor on elections in Uganda. Osborn previously worked as the country director of the National Democratic Institute, NDI, a U.S. democracy assistance organization in Uganda whose board chairperson is the former U.S. Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. The International Republican Institute, IRI, another Western donor organization, received a warning letter about its activities. The IRI is an American non-profit, non-partisan organization committed to advancing freedom and democracy worldwide by helping political parties to become more issue-based. Amongst the requirements IRI has been asked to submit are details of its work in the country. Uganda for long has been touted as one of the West's major allies in the volatile Great Lakes and Horn of Africa, where it latched on the war against terrorism to fight Al-Shabaab insurgents. Perhaps the war on terror has run its course, and as Uganda seeks new allies in China, this has prompted these former allies to begin treating each other with suspicion. In August, the Financial Intelligence Authority (FIA), an agency that tracks suspicious money movements in the country, directed banks to close financial details of 13 NGOs in the country. These included Action Aid International Uganda and the Democratic Governance Facility, an entity set up by a consortium of 8 donors: Austria, Denmark, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, the UK and the EU.
I'm not surprised at all, because the build-up, as you put it, has been, it has been very, very systematic. It actually, the most intense and civil liberties activities started right from around 2000. They mainly came in form of legislation. So most of the laws that have been enacted since 2000, they were laws that designed to to restrict civic space, to restrict civic organizing, to to restrict freedom of association. So you'll see the laws, whether it is anti-terrorism legislation, whether it's money laundering, whether it is interception of communication, and then of course you get the Public Order Management Act. Then you have the NGO Act itself now that deals specifically with the NGOs.
So both to gather and freely demonstrate against government policy, because the laws and legal system in the country requires notification, but in practice is administrative permit from the police to demonstrate. When you demonstrate without that permit from the police, the way that they react to demonstrations, killings, shooting of people indiscriminately, the use of toxic gas to disperse people who assemble. The second one is the overall question about the rights to association of NGOs. Look at the laws being passed and how they are being treated. What we have done is reduced voluntary free association into some sort of a permit system, so that if people want to associate and gather, they must first get a permit from government. You can't associate freely. For some groups, they can't even associate at all because their activities are deemed illegal.
Action Aid had its accounts frozen in 2017 during an investigation into alleged money laundering. The accounts were later unfrozen. On Friday, government halted the activities of 54 non-governmental organizations.
Quasi-democratic regimes, they do not entertain alternative ideas and alternative power centers. So they invest in killing different forms of organizing, whether it is labor unions, whether they are professional organizations, whether they are civil society organizations. They kill them in many different ways. In most cases, they actually co-opt them. Those that cannot be co-opted, they destroy them. And that is basically what we are seeing here with this kind of these kinds of actions. So I'm really not surprised that we are where we are. I have also projected that it is going to get worse before it gets better.
Amongst the organizations indefinitely suspended was Chapter 4, run by human rights lawyer Nicholas Opio.
For the last 10 years, Uganda, in the Freedom House Freedom Index, has been ranked either as unfree or partially free or repressed. These assessments are done based on the legal system, based on the response of the government to basic freedoms such as assembly and association, free speech, literally government's response to democratic freedoms. And so it is clear as daylight that the situation in the country is getting worse every year.
Opio was arrested in December 2020 and charged with money laundering. He was briefly detained but later freed on December 30th, 2020 on bail.
I'm glad to be back. What a dramatic end of the year. We look forward to defending ourselves in this courthouse. We believe that these charges are without basis.
The National Bureau for NGOs, which is a branch of the Internal Affairs Ministry, said in a statement the shutdown was ordered with immediate effect. The Bureau said its decision is anchored on the NGO's failure to comply with the law, which included operating with expired permits, failure to file accounts, and to register with the authorities.
Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say Greece has flouted certain laws or has not done made certain compliance requirements. Then an agency like the mandated agency, in our case, the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, would write to us. And they have done it before, by the way. They would write to you and say, you've not filed your returns. We are giving you notice. If you don't comply, we'll take action. The NSSF has written to us and said, we want to come and do audit. The last time they came and said they wanted to do audit. Greece is under criminal investigations by Uganda police, which they started in 2017, which they have not completed. But they wrote to us and said, we want to do an audit. And they said, okay, it's okay, but we are under a criminal investigation. So if you can get authority from the Inspector General of Police, you will come and do audit. So that's how civilized communities operate.
These laws provide the excuse that, oh, this is in accordance with the law. So we pass a law on assemblies, clearly as a reaction of the courts nullifying sections of the Police Act on the powers of the police to control public assemblies. So we quickly undermine the court judgment and pass a Public Order Management Act that reenacts and even grants the police more powers than the Police Act had granted. So that when you then use that law to repress rights of assembly, and anybody calls you out to it, say, oh no, this is in accordance with the law. So we have a web of laws that are being enacted that whittles away, that nibbles at the edges of freedoms provided for in Chapter 4.
The Bureau says its decision is anchored on the NGOs' failure to comply with the law, which included operating with expired permits, failure to file accounts, and to register with the authorities.